the State of Israel was created through terror by terrorists who called themselves freedom fighters, but were in effect colonists of Palestine, fighting both the indigenous inhabitants, the Arab population, the Palestinians, and the British colonial rulers of the territory. So the origins of the State of Israel lie in the use of terrorism, which has carried on. Israel rules over the Palestinians through terrorism. It deters its neighbors and perpetuates itself, sustains itself by terrorizing them. It's basically a terrorist state. And, it's a very anomalous thing. It's a democracy for Israeli Jews, and it is a tyranny for everyone else.
Welcome back to SolCube Analytics, where we dive into the pressing issues shaping our world today. I'm your host, Thomas Karat, and in this episode we have the distinct honor of speaking again with a diplomat who has been at the very heart of some of the most pivotal moments in modern American foreign policy, Ambassador Chas W. Freeman Jr. Ambassador Freeman's career has spanned decades, from serving as the principal interpreter for President Nixon's historic visit to China, believe it or not, and his role as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. But today we are focusing on his sharp critique of a topic that continues to stir controversy and shape global politics: America's unwavering support for Israel. As we examine this complex relationship, we cannot ignore the painful consequences that have resulted from America becoming Netanyahu's enabler for war crimes so grave that, according to the ambassador, not even Hitler would have gone that far. This support has not only further fueled the tensions in the Middle East, but has also led to unintended repercussions for the United States itself, diplomatically, militarily, and morally. The ambassador has been very outspoken about Israel's long-standing tradition of targeted assassinations, most recent examples in Iran and Lebanon, a practice that has not only escalated the circle of violence, but also tarnished America's image by association. He points to the stark reality that Israel was virtually born out of acts of terror committed by Jewish militants who even attacked Jewish targets and later became Israeli prime ministers. These are facts that are often glossed over in the sanitized narratives of history. And as we zoom in a bit closer, the ambassador doesn't shy away from condemning the influence of AIPAC, the powerful pro-Israel lobby, which has, in his view, completely corrupted the US political system. The defilement of American Congress, where lawmakers gave standing ovations to Benjamin Netanyahu for a speech riddled with lies and deception, underscores the troubling extent of this influence. Through this conversation, we'll explore the harsh truth and ask difficult questions about the cost of American policies, both to the world and to itself. So sit tight as we dive into a candid, no-holds-barred discussion with Ambassador Chas W. Freeman Jr., a man whose insights challenge the very core of US foreign policy as we know it today. But before we do, a quick call to action. Some of the best interviews on this channel are shadowbanned, which means YouTube is not presenting them to you, the viewer. The latest example is my interview with James Bamford, where we discussed the truly amazing story that underlies Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption scandal. Did you know that a Hollywood billionaire not only stole nuclear secrets from America, but then sold them to Israel, and that Netanyahu helped him to stay out of troubles to this very day? And then Netanyahu turned around and started to ask for favors, hence the bribery charges in Israel against him. Other examples are the interviews with the so-called Hamas lawyer Stanley Cohen, or the interview with the former chief of staff of Colin Powell, who told me that the white powder in the test tube that Colin Powell showed the world when he testified at the UN just before the war on Iraq was actually salt. So if you're interested in content that apparently you're not supposed to see, content that goes against the mainstream narrative, have a look at some of the previous interviews that we have recorded for your pleasure. And of course, it really helps to spread the news if you like and subscribe to this channel. Ambassador Chas Freeman, what a pleasure having you back. It's the third time that you grant me an audience, and I really mean it, so it's really appreciated. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And I'm glad to be back with you.
I wrote you an email a couple of days ago, actually only 2 or 3 days ago, and it was like 10 o'clock in the morning for me, but it was 4 o'clock in the morning for you, and within 3 minutes I had a response. Are you not sleeping?
There are lots of reasons to lie awake and worry about what is happening in the world on multiple fronts. But the assassinations carried out by Mr. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, on his orders in Tehran and South Beirut, were a clear challenge to start a larger war in the Middle East, or perhaps there's already a larger war in progress, and this would simply kickstart an expansion of the fighting. But in any event, it was a reason to worry, and I was, in fact, insomniac and sitting at my computer when you sent the email.
You just said a keyword. Netanyahu ordered it, and I educated myself. It's only the prime minister who can command targeted assassination. So it was really Netanyahu. It's exactly like you said.
Yes, that is very clear. There is an excellent book by Ronan Bergman, who is, I'm sure you have it, called Rise and Kill First,
yeah.
Which details the evolution of the procedures within Israel for authorizing these murders, and documents quite a number of them. I think the total that he cites is around 3,000 political murders. This is the standard practice of the Israeli state.
Yeah. And I have the book. It's about 700 pages thick. And I have the book because I interviewed the Dutch ambassador Nicolaus van Dam recently. By any chance, I know the world is small sometimes. Do you know the ambassador?
Regrettably, I don't.
Okay, he was the Dutch ambassador to the Middle East. I don't know, Turkey, Lebanon, Iraq, I believe. Also in the middle, he spent his whole career in the Middle East. He mentioned this book. I bought it. I'm now on page 100 or so from 700. So it's really a history of targeted assassination going back prior to the creation of the State of Israel.
Yes, it's a reminder that the State of Israel was created through terror by terrorists who called themselves freedom fighters, but were in effect colonists of Palestine, fighting both the indigenous inhabitants, the Arab population, the Palestinians, and the British colonial rulers of the territory. And of course, from the very beginning, they reflected a political culture of which you find in Eastern Europe. Many of them had backgrounds there, and they were associated there often with criminal gangs. So the origins of the State of Israel lie in the use of terrorism, which has carried on. Israel rules over the Palestinians through terrorism. It deters its neighbors and perpetuates itself, sustains itself by terrorizing them. It's basically a terrorist state. And, it's a very anomalous thing. It's a democracy for Israeli Jews, and it is a tyranny for everyone else.
I said it on a number of other interviews. Israel is virtually a child of terror. So those terror gangs, Irgun, Lehi, Haganah, the Stern gang, yeah. And this is not you or me saying. That was the U.S. government and the British government at the time. They qualified them as terror organizations. And many people believed that they just assassinated, killed, and bombed in Palestine / Israel. It's not true. They tried to kill Winston Churchill. They bombed in various other countries, inclusive they bombed their own Jewish population in Egypt and Iraq to scare them.
That's correct. They have a long history of false flag and deceptive operations directed at manipulating public perceptions and, in the case of Iraq and Egypt, setting off the expulsion of the local Jewish populations and their incorporation into the state of Israel. Because the basic problem that the Israeli settlers have faced from the beginning was a demographic imbalance. That is to say, they wanted a state which would be overwhelmingly Jewish in composition, but the local population was overwhelmingly Christian and Muslim, and not of European origin. So they basically staged events in Baghdad, in Cairo, and elsewhere to scare the local Jewish populations, the Mizrahim, the Eastern Jews or Arab Jews, to resettle in Israel. And I think, one of the most distinguished scholars of all this is himself originally an Iraqi Jew, an Arab Jew, Avi Shlaim, really great man in terms of he cleaves to the wonderful Jewish tradition of very fearless pursuit of the truth. But he is also an Arab, and he describes the experience of being dislocated from Baghdad and the very vigorous, numerous Jewish community in Baghdad, and resettled willy-nilly in Israel. His books are worth reading.
Yeah, he's one of those so-called new historians. I interviewed him twice. He's a very gentle, kind man, I have to say. But coming back to the theme of our discussion today, there was the twin assassination in Beirut and in Iran. Yeah. My first question would be the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. Is it not a trap for Iran? Is it not a twin trap for both, for Iran and for the US, coming from Netanyahu?
Well, I think that assassination had multiple objectives. One was to provoke Hamas into breaking off the hostage negotiations, which Prime Minister Netanyahu is, I think, quite correctly accused of not wishing to see succeed. That is, the families of the hostages in Israel have been very critical of him and charged him with insincerity, which is his customary characteristic, I suppose. And I think he wanted, in the first instance, to force Hamas to break off the negotiations. Second objective was to provoke Iran into attacking Israel, to have a wider war. This has been his objective for a quarter century or more, and he's made no secret of it. He's repeatedly tried to involve the United States in attacks on Iran, largely over the alleged nuclear weapons program in Iran, and despite the fact that his own intelligence services, like the CIA and others, have consistently concluded that Iran does not have an active nuclear weapons program and has not had one for decades. But in any event, he sought to provoke Iran, and he did this in absolutely the most provocative way you could imagine. During the presidential inauguration of the new president in Iran, in a state guest house at which Ismail Haniyeh was present, we still don't know precisely how the assassination was carried out, but there was a story put out, actually by Ronan Bergman, whom I mentioned earlier, who's very close to the Israeli intelligence apparatus, which is probably deceptive, that a bomb was placed in the guest house. This is a sort of story that evokes paranoia and fear and is therefore very useful. But we now have eyewitness accounts which suggest it was a short-range missile fired at the apartment. In any event, the major achievement of this, I don't think Mr. Netanyahu quite anticipated. He has done something that no one else has done for 14 centuries. He has brought Shia and Sunni Muslims together against a common enemy. So you have Tehran, the capital of the Shia faith, if you will, the major country where Shiism is the dominant religion, and celebrating Ismail Haniyeh, who was the leader of an ardently Sunni Islamic resistance movement in Palestine. And we see now posters being going up, not just celebrating that particular unity, but also Erdogan, also Sunni, celebrating unity with Hezbollah, which is the bête noire of Sunni Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula. So what Mr. Netanyahu and his assassination have done is unify the entire Islamic world against Israel. And he has basically changed the nature of the question that people are asking. As I think I mentioned once before, when we spoke, there is this rather odd Israeli question that asks you to endorse Israel's right to exist. No other country I know of demands that you recognize its right to exist. After all, Israel does exist. What is the point? Well, the point has been implicitly that if Israel has a right to exist in Palestine, no other state does. Therefore, this is when you agree Israel has a right to exist, you are agreeing with it that there can be no self-determination for Palestinians. And that was the question. The savagery of the last 10 months or so in Gaza and in the West Bank, which is less reported but equally brutal, have changed that question. The question became, does Israel deserve to exist given its behavior? And we've seen a series of international court decisions in The Hague, which charge Israel with all kinds of illegalities, including the supreme illegality, which is genocide. Now the question post-assassination, I think, has been changed yet again. Can the world tolerate the existence of a state that has shown that there is no criminal act, no act of depravity that it is not prepared to carry out? That is now becoming the active question. So Mr. Netanyahu has led Israel to the abyss. And this is terribly ironic because the founders of the State of Israel saw it as a safe haven from European anti-Semitism, which was a horrible phenomenon and reflected in the Holocaust. So they believed that Jews needed to gather together in their own state to be free of anti-Semitism and threat from non-Jews. But the behavior of the Israeli state has now made Israel the least safe place for Jews on the planet. And in fact, Mr. Netanyahu's actions have now brought Israel to the point where there is a very real possibility that it will be destroyed, either by immigration of people of conscience and the fearful. And nobody wants to live under constant fear of rocket attack or assault by one's neighbors, or alternatively, in another Holocaust caused by the war that Mr. Netanyahu has sought to provoke. Because that war, if it happens, will not necessarily be simply a repetition of the events of April when Israel provoked Iran into a rocket attack. That was a very carefully carried out maneuver by Iran, signaled in advance, they told the United States and others they didn't intend to kill anyone. They conducted a very slow, staged attack with plenty of warning. They did, however, send a few very modern missiles into precise targets at military bases and intelligence facilities in Israel, and thereby demonstrated that if they were to repeat the action, they had the capacity to do great damage. But they did no damage, really, other than to the swimming pool at the air base in the Negev, the officers' club swimming pool, which was, I think, a signal of a sort. I think the problem now, if I may, and I apologize for running on at such length, but I think we have the head of the U.S. Central Command now in Israel, hunkered down, preparing to again support Israel against an attack by somebody or other, Iran, Hezbollah, Yemen, Iraqi militias, we don't know, maybe all of them together. But I'm not sure that's what's going to happen. I think the red lines that Israel crossed with these double assassinations in the most humiliating possible way, the affront to Iranian honor, the affront to the unstated ground rules of confrontation with Hezbollah is such that they may have finally provoked retaliatory assassination policies on the part of the Iranians and Hezbollah. Up to this time, they have been constrained by religious doctrine and practical concerns from carrying out assassinations of members of the Israeli cabinet or general staff or indeed Israelis in general. I fear that red line may have been crossed. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that Iran has said definitively, publicly, that it will retaliate and that it will not be deterred from retaliating. This has interestingly led President Putin of the Russian Federation to send his national security advisor, General Sergei Shoigu, to Tehran, carrying a letter offering to mediate between Iran and Israel, because Russia, like every other country, fears the consequences of a wider violent explosion in the Middle East. This is all setting in motion interesting developments, but I don't think anyone has any idea at this point what is going to happen. I don't take the delay in retaliation or reprisal, if you will, by Iran and Hezbollah or Yemen or Iraq as signaling a lack of willingness to carry out a reprisal. I think it is a deliberative process. They are trying to figure out precisely what the best retaliation would be that would have the least chance of bringing the United States in against them, as Mr. Netanyahu has tried to do. The whole purpose of these provocations, is to entangle my country, the United States, in a disastrous war, which some crazy Israelis believe will result in their being the dominant power forever in the Middle East. That is my view of what is happening now. I think we must await decisions in Tehran and Beirut and Sana'a and in various parts of Iraq.
Yeah, you said Netanyahu is challenged by a number, of organizations. He's charged by there are already troubles with the UN. Israel is no longer really interested in anything to do with the UN, the ICC, ICG, yeah. But on the contrast, I think it was a week ago, Netanyahu was a week ago, 10 days, he was in the US, and I believe Gideon Levy even counted them. He told me there were 61 standing ovations for Netanyahu in the Congress. So how is this explainable, given...
This is, from my point of view as an American, this was a defilement of our legislature, and it was a national humiliation. I don't think that emulating the People's Congress in Pyongyang in its slavish devotion to Kim Jong-un is worthy of any legislative body. I would hope that had Adolf Eichmann appeared before the Congress, he would not have been received in this light. But this is a man, Netanyahu, whose speech, by the way, was a barrage of lies and deceptive comments, nothing true whatsoever, very skillfully delivered. He's a very good politician. But this is a product of the slavish venality of our Congress, which depends on campaign donations and is careerist. Very few there are willing to stand up for principle. So this is a discrediting of American democracy globally. The world saw that and does not admire what happened, nor do I. And I think many other Americans agree with me that our political elite is out of touch with popular opinion, which has turned decisively in a different direction. There was a poll just the other day that showed that I believe 55% of Americans do not believe the United States should help defend Israel, given what it has done. Now, the Republicans, apparently there's still a majority in favor of that, but Democrats, I believe that the figure was 15% favoring a defense of Israel, and independents, which I am, somewhere in the 40% range. So Mr. Netanyahu is a creature of the past. He has boasted of his ability to manipulate American politics. He's demonstrated that on numerous occasions. I think this was his finale. He will not have another chance.
I can't resist to ask, since you mentioned his name, but are you comparing Netanyahu to Adolf Eichmann?
It's genocide? Yes, sure. Adolf Hitler. We haven't seen anything like this since perhaps Pol Pot in the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. This is a government which is composed of people who openly state, and the newly appointed rabbi for the Israeli armed forces says that it is okay to relieve soldiers' tension by raping women, that it's perfectly proper to starve Palestinians to death, and the only reason they can't do it, this is Mr. Smotrich, the only reason they can't do it is because, quote, their allies are not in favor of it, and so forth and so on. This is a government that has probably killed 9% of the population in Gaza already, judging by figures developed by The Lancet and other reputable journals and students of these issues. It is a government that is under indictment, in effect, in The Hague. It is headed by a man who is a candidate for a warrant for his arrest as a perpetrator of genocide. What is the difference? The only difference, frankly, is that the Nazis were sufficiently embarrassed by what they were doing to try to hide it. Israel is doing it right in the open and getting away with it. And there are all sorts of follow-on effects from this. It is dividing the world because Europe, which I have to say is cowardly and disorganized, goes along with the United States for the most part in backing Israel. News media are censored, both on this issue and on the Ukraine war. And in the United States, if you argue, if you use the word genocide and you speak bluntly and honestly about what is happening, you are deplatformed. You are taken off the corporate media platforms that now serve as the principal vehicles for communication politically in our modern society. So, yes, sure. I mean, genocide is genocide. And I don't think it should be condoned by anyone. This brings up the point. The phrase never again either means never again for human beings, or it means never again only for Jews. The latter definition is despicable and cannot be accepted. And it is, in effect, the proposition that never again only applies to Israeli Jews is on trial at The Hague. And I think the answer is The Hague so far has given is the right one. This never again applies to everyone, not just to Jews.
I think the problem with Den Haag, and I'm living here in the Netherlands, the problem with Den Haag is that, the enemies of the US are finding themselves very often in front of the courts of Den Haag, but the US and its allies hardly ever.
No, we have exempted ourselves, but of course this gets to the issue of the so-called rules-based order, which is quite distinct from international law. I gave a speech to a group of Chinese officials, actually, and CEOs at Cambridge University in England a while back, and I cited the Chinese legalist tradition of Han Feizi, who was the premier thinker of this sort, and he argued for a government in which decisions were made in secret, laws were not published. He said, if you publish a law, people will find loopholes, so you should keep it unpublished, and you should be free to alter the law at will to produce the desired outcome of any procedure. This is rule by law, not rule of law. The ruler is not subject to the law. The ruler issues the rules, gives the orders, and decides to whom they apply. But this is exactly what the G7 are now arguing, that they should make the rules. They did make the rules back in the day of imperialism. This is the club of imperialists, former imperialists, repented imperialists perhaps, but they are arguing that they should make the rules without consulting the rest of the world. They should decide whether they will subject themselves to those rules or not, and they should decide to whom else those rules will apply. And if the rules don't produce the desired outcome, they reserve the right to change them midstream. Now, this is not a rule of law, this is rule by law, and it is the so-called rules-based order is basically a kind of dictatorship, not a consultative process. International law, like law in a democracy, is the product of consultative processes. It represents the opinion of a consensus of the majority. Rule by law, the rules-based order, is an effort by a minority to impose rules on others. So this is the condition, and I would say that Israel's scofflaw behavior over decades has had a good deal to do with creating this situation, the destruction of what we built after World War II, the humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions, the whole edifice of anti-racist, anti-genocide, international legislation, if you will. This has all been set aside. And now we have, we make the rules, Israel makes the rules, it doesn't follow them, it applies them to others, and we go along with that. This is not right.
Coming back to the assassinations, so we have established at least some motivations for this attack, which is to draw the US into a wider war in the Middle East. Speaking of the US, do you think they had any involvement or at least advanced knowledge of this attack?
I doubt it. I don't think, I suspect we were advised the last minute, but not consulted about it. We have reacted in two very contradictory ways. On the one hand, we've said, well, this can't lead to a wider war, and we're trying to prevent a wider war. And on the other hand, and we've said, well, we weren't consulted, we didn't know about it. But at the same time, we've sent 12 warships to the Eastern Mediterranean. We've made statements about how we will back Israel. We have the head of the Central Command in Israel. Clearly, we are enabling everything that Israel is doing. So the statement that we are innocent of the assassination in Tehran, or for that matter in Beirut, more questionable actually, but the statement that we're innocent of this does not fly. It does not persuade anyone, because the enablement of this act by Israel is from us, as is the case with the genocide in Gaza. And so this is an effort by us to have our cake and eat it too, if you will, and it won't work.
So if the US was not involved, not really informed, or only informed at the last minute, then again, this is a statement from Ambassador Nicholas van Dam. He said the US has created a Frankenstein which it no longer controls. So in light of what we just discussed, that's perfectly true.
Yes, and I will go back to, I should have added or connected my initial description of the way in which Israel protects itself and its citizens in West Asia, and that is through terrorism, and the terrorism of the assassinations was intended to restore the deterrent effect of Israel's capacity for terror, to terrorize and thereby inhibit attacks on Israel. Israel is basically ruthless, and it follows no. It has totally departed from the principles of Judaism as it is understood in the West. When you have a rabbi saying it's okay for soldiers to rape women to relieve their stress, or that it's okay to kill babies because they might grow up to be opponents, this is nothing that the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition can embrace. It is something quite different. I don't know that even Adolf Hitler would have agreed with that.
So let's assume that the US was not informed, not involved, but still there will be repercussions, in regards to the US-Iranian relations, because even the failure to prevent such a thing, is problematic.
Well, here, of course, the gesture by Mr. Putin sending Sergei Shoigu to Tehran with an offer to mediate between Israel and Iran illustrates a fundamental failing of American foreign policy. We don't talk to Iran. We don't have the sort of relations with countries that we dislike that enable us to carry on a diplomatic dialogue or conduct a mediation. And here I must say, I can imagine that Bill Burns, the head of the CIA, who has been the negotiator with in a proxy negotiation with Hamas and with Ismail Haniyeh, must have been totally mortified and felt betrayed when Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran in the way that he was. And incidentally, it's interesting, of course, another consequence of Mr. Netanyahu's actions was to elevate Sinwar to the head of Hamas. So he has now brought out into the open the zero-sum game between Palestinians and Israeli Jews. Israel's objective from the very beginning, from 1948, was to expel the Palestinians. And if it couldn't expel them, it would murder them, as it is now doing in Gaza. Mr. Netanyahu does not want that war to end. He has said it will continue until Hamas is eliminated, but Hamas is a pseudonym for Palestinian nationalism. It is an idea, a movement, and it's not going to go away. And in fact, this strategy, if it can be dignified with that term, by Mr. Netanyahu, has put in jeopardy his own country. The question is, does he care? Many who have known him over the years have observed that he doesn't seem to care about anything except himself. It is a sad day to see. There are many decent people in Israel, despite the fact that the majority appear to support genocide. There are many who don't and who are decent people, and he's put them in jeopardy. He has also put the world's Jews in jeopardy, because this is all reviving anti-Semitism, which was, largely gone, not completely. Human beings always have others that they detest, but it was largely gone. It's coming back. And this is the result of Mr. Netanyahu's and his extremist colleagues, Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich and others of that sort, what they've been doing. They have made Israel into a pariah, an outlaw. And you know what happens to outlaws? Posses are organized to get them. This is not a tenable position for the state of Israel. And the sooner it pulls itself up, the better it will be. I will add, by the way, that Netanyahu's actions have not only jeopardized Israel in foreign relations terms, but domestically. The ultra-conservative, ultra-Orthodox Jews have now been told that they must be conscripted, and they are refusing to go. So there is a split between the Haredim and the of Judea, perhaps, and the settlers have raided a jail where the government, the military, had the temerity to try to punish people who had gang raped a prisoner. And there's actually been a television debate in Israel about whether it's legitimate to gang rape Palestinian prisoners. Is this proper policy or not? These people have not been punished. You had the effort to emasculate judicial independence. And so Israel is now totally divided. And of course, there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis who've been displaced from their homes by the spillover from the conflict with Gaza and with Lebanon. And in the middle of all this, finally, and this goes back to Mr. Netanyahu's speech, I think Israel has lost all the credibility that it ever had, and it's lost all the sympathy that the Holocaust victimhood gave it. Now, this is sad, very sad.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up an article. So Channel 12 News, the most popular channel in Israel, hosts a debate for and against institutional rape of Hamas detainees as a policy. And that follows I can link it in the description of the video there. Included in this clip is a video stream where in a detention center a group of Israelis actually rape detainees. They shield the few a little bit with their shields, and apparently there was a live stream to either Smotrich or Ben-Gvir. Yeah. So I think it was Ben-Gvir. Yeah, that's what they say. So there was a live, and they had Israeli public, live as spectators. I mean, this is
what do you do with sadism on that level, with mass murder, with the utter depravity of that scene. This gets to the point that I made earlier. Israel's changed the question. The question is no longer, does it have the right to exist? The question is, can the world tolerate the existence of a state that does these things? Earlier the answer when the Nazis did comparable things was no, the world cannot tolerate this. What's the answer now?
The challenge with Israel, and again, I'm saying this as a behavior analyst, the challenge with Israel is that the Israeli kids are indoctrinated since kindergarten. Yeah, and I know this because I interviewed Nurit Peled El-Hanan, the sister from Miko Peled, and she studied racism in Israeli school books. Yeah. And that's current, so that's the last 20 years or so. Yeah, so it's amazing how sophisticated. I mean, outside of school books, yeah, the whole process of indoctrination, which you need in order to have an army who performs this kind of act.
Exactly. Yeah. But you interviewed Avi Schleim, and the interesting thing is, interesting may not be the right word, horrifying thing perhaps, is that the Mizrahim, the Arab Jews who emigrated to Israel in response to Israeli actions that forced them to do that, they arrived with no experience of anti-Semitism per se in their own societies, and they have been successfully indoctrinated, taken on tours of Auschwitz and other relics of the Holocaust, and the Holocaust has become the central theme of the Israeli identity. Eternal victimhood. We can do no wrong. Everyone is out to get us. Anything that happens is not our fault. This is psychotic, frankly.
If we come back briefly to the standing ovations in the U.S., from an understanding standpoint. Yesterday, I interviewed Rich Forer. You won't know him. He wrote 2 books. He was a former member of AIPAC, which made him very interesting to me because when he was about 58 years, he started to awaken, how he calls it. He started to educate himself. He read a lot, all kinds of things. And he saw what's really happening. And he told me, I don't have the exact numbers, but something like 58 or 68% of the Congress, I believe. Again, I'm not entirely sure. I didn't have a chance yet to review the interview. Are actually of the U.S. Congress are actually funded by AIPAC, and not with pocket money. With pocket money, with serious donations.
Yeah, no, I'm aware of him. He's very eloquent, and I think a very honest man. And I admire him as I admire the Jewish tradition of truth-telling, which seems to have disappeared in Israel, but is alive and well everywhere else. He is an admirable man for his honesty and his bravery, because if you stand up and say the truth, as he did, you are punished by members of your own community. No, I'm aware of him. I believe the figure is that on the Democratic Party side, 70% of donations are to one extent or another controlled by people connected with Zionist causes. Maybe Jews, maybe evangelical Christians, but the vast majority the money comes from Jewish plutocrats, of whom we have many. And I think on the Republican side, I don't know what the figure is, but of course, as you know, the balance, one of Mr. Netanyahu's earlier crimes was taking universal nonpartisan support for Israel and making it a partisan matter, alienating Democrats and relying solely on Republicans, trying to humiliate Obama when he was in the White House, working with Republicans in the Congress to do that. That is how the first 3 appearances before Congress happened. This is part of his effort to lock in the Republican support for Likud, his own party, in Israel. Things are changing, but this is a state. Israel looks like a state that is in many ways imploding. Its foreign friendships are in grave jeopardy. Its domestic scene is divided in multiple ways. Mr. Netanyahu does not have the confidence of Israeli citizens on any subject. His own military has accused him of being without strategy and carrying out pointless destruction in Gaza. Now he's menaced the region with a wider war. His own military doesn't want that. They know what the consequence would be. The Israeli military is full of very bright people who understand perfectly well what the risks are. Evidently, Mr. Netanyahu doesn't understand the risks, or he doesn't care.
There are a couple of things to unpack. So first of all, irrespective of now, Den Haag and ICC, ICG. Yeah? But prior, Netanyahu has already troubles at home, legal troubles, right? But it would be tempting to hang it all on Netanyahu, because what would really change if Netanyahu would be replaced tomorrow? Meanwhile, you have such a right-wing government, and this is something that puzzles me. Don't the Israelis see themselves? Again, the comparison with Germany, I don't know, it's not fitting right, yeah. But when Hitler came to power, and now with the right-wing government in Israel, don't the Israelis see that sooner or later this right-wing power within Israel will turn against its own people in order
Some do, and there's significant immigration from Israel, and partly it is immigration by people of conscience who understand that. Partly it's by people who are fearful of that. Whether they have a conscience or not is another question. There is very little faith among Israelis generally now in the longevity, the durability of the state they have built. What is that state? Is it a democracy? No, it's a democracy, not even for Jews now. In many ways, even Jews have lost the rights of that are the crown jewels of Western civilization, and of course, Israel is racist to the core. The first time I went there, I was shocked. I had been in Mississippi in 1965. Exactly the same kind of racist, condescending attitudes. But at least in Mississippi, they weren't trying to kill people for the most part. It's hard to see. I did a lot of work with South Africa. I was involved in the effort to remove the South Africans from Namibia and the Cubans from Angola, a classic exercise of diplomatic ingenuity by Chester Crocker, the Assistant Secretary of State for Africa at the time. Brilliant. It worked despite no support from anyone. I know what ended apartheid in South Africa was not foreign pressure, but a crisis of conscience in the Dutch Reformed Church. And F.W. de Klerk, with whom I spoke on numerous occasions, had a crisis of conscience. His brother was a dominie, a minister in the church, and very liberal. And de Klerk, like Forster, had a conversion. And do you see anything like this happening in Israel? I don't. Now, if Mr. Netanyahu goes, maybe we'll have Ben Gvir instead. You lose Hitler and you get Himmler or Heil, some other monster. So Israelis need to rediscover their conscience, and that means they need to rediscover Judaism, in my view, because I think Zionism has become the very negation of Judaism. Everything that was good about Judaism, which inspired both Christianity and Islam, and which created our culture at its finest, has been overtaken, overthrown, erased, forgotten, reversed. I hope that I'm not Jewish, although I have Jewish grandchildren. I hope very well that the world's Jews outside Israel will talk to their co-religionists and help them realize what they have become.
The challenge on both sides, on Palestinian side, where in the example of Gaza, you have a generation that's grown, several generations that basically don't know anything else than this surreal, I'm searching for
Toilet.
the
Yes.
exactly situation with daily raids, bombings, snipers, F-16s, and so on. And on the
Well,
Israeli side,
and on the other side, Israeli Jews know only racist supremacy.
yeah. And
So,
if I look on social media and looking at the settlers, yeah, which operate now in the West Bank kind of under the cover of darkness, which is produced by what's happening in Gaza, yeah. But if you see what's happening there, and what astonishes me, but it shouldn't, yeah. If you look at these guys, they're like 15, 16, 17 years old, all armed to the teeth, doing despicable things, yeah. They were equally as in Gaza. They were growing up in that environment. They do not know anything else. Yeah, it's reinforced. Yeah, if you really look at them, they almost look like, how shall I say this? Thugs. Yeah, unwashed, shabby clothing.
they are thugs and the so-called hilltop youth. No, this is the ugliest thing. Now, I don't know, had the pogroms in Ukraine in the Tsarist era, for example, been televised, what the world would have done. I would hope that the world would have stopped that. This is very sad. It is a reproach to all of us that this is still going on. So I think we should probably end this depressing conversation here. And I will look forward to another conversation with you on a happier topic at some other time.
Yes. I am really grateful for your time, Ambassador, and I hope I have not depressed you too much. I mean, I see it's
not you. It's the situation. If you're not depressed, there's something wrong with you. You look at this and you think this is normal. There is something fundamentally wrong with you. I don't see how people sleep and with awareness of what is happening.
Yeah. Ambassador, again, deeply grateful for your time. I thank you very much, and I do hope we will speak again.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you for tuning into SaltCube Analytics. We hope today's episode gave you something to think about and challenged the way you see the world. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe or follow us and leave a review or a comment. Your feedback helps us keep questioning the status quo. For more insights and discussions, follow us on YouTube, Rumble, TikTok, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or any of your other preferred podcast platforms. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and remember, always look beyond the headlines.